Have you ever wondered why some older men choose to remain single, even when they have the option to remarry? For many, it's not about loneliness or bitterness. It's about making a choice that brings peace and stability. Take John Miller, for example. At 62 years old, John has been through it all: long relationships, a failed marriage, and the ups and downs that come with it. Yet, despite having the opportunity to remarry, John made a decision that many may find surprising. He decided to stay single. Why? It's not because he's incapable of love or doesn't want companionship. It's because he's learned a simple truth: peace is far more valuable than passion. The excitement and unpredictability of relationships, especially after a certain age, start to lose their appeal. John no longer craves the emotional roller coaster. He's seen how quickly love can fade, how the thrill can turn to exhaustion, and how the promise of forever can break apart. Now, he values a calm, stable life, one where he's in control, without the chaos and heartache that often come with relationships. And he's not alone. Many older men, just like John, choose solitude over remarrying because they've learned that a peaceful, independent life is far more rewarding than the uncertain promises of a second chance at love. John Miller's decision to remain single didn't come overnight. It was the result of years of reflecting on his past relationships and understanding what he truly values now. At 62, John had lived through enough emotional turmoil to know that relationships, especially romantic ones, often bring more stress than joy as you grow older. The disappointment, the hurt, and the repeated cycles of unmet expectations had taught him that peace of mind is a rare and precious thing. It wasn't about avoiding companionship. It was about avoiding the emotional chaos that came with it. Over the years, John had been through moments where love felt conditional. He'd been in relationships where affection depended on how much he provided, how much he sacrificed, and when he couldn't meet those expectations, the love faded. But what he discovered was that there's one thing that doesn't fade, one thing that doesn't require him to perform or prove himself: loyalty. This is where his bond with his dog, Max, comes into play. Max doesn't expect anything but basic care: food, exercise, attention. Max doesn't care if John's having a bad day or if his career isn't flourishing. Max's love is unconditional. And this loyalty is what John values now more than anything. It's not that he can't find another human to share his life with. It's that he knows the emotional toll it takes. He's seen enough to understand that the emotional stability he craves can only come from within and by avoiding the kind of relationships that drain him. The emotional cost of dating or remarrying simply isn't worth the risk anymore. John Miller's perspective on relationships shifted dramatically as he got older. Looking back at his earlier years, he saw how much emotional energy he had invested in trying to make things work, only to face disappointment and heartache. He realized that, over time, the emotional cost of keeping up with the demands of relationships simply outweighed the rewards. His previous marriages were filled with love, yes, but also with expectations that he couldn't always meet. There were the moments of joy, but they were often overshadowed by the demands for constant emotional support, compromise, and performance. And when things didn't go as planned, the cracks in the foundation of those relationships would show. John wasn't bitter about these experiences. He was simply wiser. He understood that love, as he had experienced it in the past, was often conditional. It was dependent on what he could provide, and when he couldn't deliver, the affection and attention faded. Now, with Max, his dog, John found a kind of stability he hadn't realized was possible. Max was there every day, waiting for him with unconditional love, without expectations or demands. This simple, pure companionship became a reminder to John that true emotional peace comes when you stop seeking approval from others and start seeking peace within yourself. And so, as he embraced his new life of solitude, he understood that sometimes staying single isn't about avoiding love. It's about protecting your own heart and mind from the emotional costs of relationships that can no longer offer what they once did. As John Miller continued to reflect on his past relationships, he couldn't help but notice a pattern. The more he gave, the more others expected, but the return on that investment was never what he hoped for. Time and time again, he had seen the same cycle: emotional highs followed by sharp, unexpected lows. He had loved deeply, sacrificed willingly, but in the end, It often felt like he was the only one trying to make it work. And as he grew older, something changed. John's perspective on love and relationships was no longer about proving himself or winning someone's affection. He realized that love, in its purest form, shouldn't come with so many conditions. He wasn't afraid of being alone. He was afraid of the emotional toll that would come with repeating the same patterns. The thought of entering another relationship, only to end up in the same emotional tug-of-war, no longer appealed to him. He had been down that road before. He had experienced the heartbreak, the emotional drain, and the feeling of being taken for granted. Now, with Max by his side, he realized that loyalty didn't need to be earned or proved. It was simply there, unconditional and reliable. Max gave him something no human relationship could: peace. It wasn't about avoiding love. It was about preserving his peace of mind. John understood now that the most important thing wasn't having someone to share his life with. It was having the freedom to live it on his terms, without the constant emotional weight of unmet expectations. As time passed, John found himself enjoying the solitude more than he ever thought possible. He had always associated being alone with loneliness, but now he understood that the two were not the same. Being alone didn't mean he was missing something. It meant he had everything he needed. His mornings were quiet, with no demands, no expectations, just peace. He could sip his coffee on the porch, enjoy the sunrise, and simply be. For years, he had sacrificed his peace for the sake of relationships that promised love but delivered stress. Now, he realized that his decision to stay single wasn't just about avoiding another failed relationship. It was about prioritizing his well-being. He had learned that time was the most valuable asset he had left, and he wasn't going to waste it on anything that didn't bring him joy or fulfillment. Max, his loyal dog, was the only companion he needed. With Max, there were no complicated emotions or expectations. There was no need to explain himself, to keep up with someone else's changing moods. He didn't have to perform or prove anything. The companionship was simple, genuine, and always there. John had come to see that this was the kind of relationship he needed, a steady, reliable one. And as the years went by, he found that he didn't miss the chaos of love. He had discovered that the quiet, uncomplicated life he had built was the true form of freedom. John's decision to remain single was no longer a sign of retreat, but a declaration of self-respect, an understanding that peace was a privilege he wasn't willing to give up. John had never realized just how much he had been compromising his own happiness for the sake of others. When he was younger, he thought that love meant sacrifice, that relationships required constant giving. But now, looking back, he saw it differently. The years of putting others' needs before his own had drained him, left him feeling empty and unappreciated. Now, in his 60s, he understood that true love wasn't about what you could offer or how much you could endure. It was about finding peace, respect, and mutual understanding. The emotional cost of being constantly available, constantly trying to meet someone else's expectations, had finally caught up with him. His decision to stay single was not about avoiding love. It was about choosing self-respect. He had spent so many years in relationships where his feelings were secondary, where the emotional labor was unbalanced, and where he was often left feeling like he was giving more than he received. Now, with Max by his side, John realized that his emotional needs were being met in a way that no human relationship ever had. Max didn't need him to perform. There was no emotional price to pay for loyalty. And in that loyalty, John found something far more valuable than he had ever experienced in his past relationships: peace. He had stopped searching for validation outside of himself and began to find contentment in his own company. He realized that the peace he had fought so hard to achieve was worth more than any relationship. He was free, not just from the turmoil of past loves, but free to be himself, without the constant need to justify his worth. John had come to a powerful realization. He no longer feared being alone. In fact, he had come to cherish it. As a younger man, he had always seen solitude as something to be avoided, something that implied failure or loneliness. But now, in his 60s, he knew the truth. Solitude wasn't something to be feared. It was a refuge. He had spent so many years seeking approval from others, looking for validation in relationships that never quite lived up to his expectations. Now, with Max, he understood that there was a different kind of satisfaction in life. The companionship he shared with his dog was simple, straightforward, and free of the complications that came with human relationships. He didn't have to worry about unspoken expectations, emotional manipulation, or the constant need to please. He could just be himself. And as the days went by, he realized that his life, though quiet, was full in ways he had never imagined before. The peace he had found in his own company was more fulfilling than any relationship he had ever been in. He wasn't just avoiding the pitfalls of marriage or relationships. He was choosing to protect his peace and his emotional well-being. He had learned the hard way that relationships, no matter how well-intentioned, often came at a high emotional cost. But now, with Max at his side, John knew that he had made the right choice. His life was his own, and for the first time in a long while, it was exactly the way he wanted it to be. John had reached a point in his life where he no longer needed to explain his choices to anyone. He had spent too many years trying to live up to the expectations of others, but now, that was no longer his priority. He wasn't interested in meeting society's standard of success or happiness, which often included being in a relationship, getting married, and building a family. For John, those things had never brought him the peace he was seeking. After all the heartache, the constant compromises, and the emotional toll that relationships had taken on him, he had come to a simple conclusion. Peace was his ultimate goal. And now, with Max, he found that peace in a way that was both fulfilling and uncomplicated. John no longer felt the need to prove anything. He wasn't incomplete without a partner, and he didn't need validation from anyone to feel whole. For the first time in years, he was living life on his own terms. His mornings were his own, his evenings were quiet and peaceful, and he didn't feel the weight of someone else's expectations. The world had conditioned him to believe that being alone was a tragedy, but now, he saw it as a victory. His choice to remain single wasn't a retreat from love. It was an embrace of self-respect and emotional freedom. It wasn't just about avoiding the chaos of relationships. It was about honoring his own needs and choosing a life that brought him true happiness. John's decision to stay single was no longer a decision he needed to justify. He had learned that the value of his time, his energy, and his peace was far greater than any fleeting relationship could offer. Looking at his life now, he realized how much emotional weight he had carried through the years, all in the name of love. And for what? To experience the same patterns of disappointment, unmet needs, and heartache over and over again. The relationships that had once seemed so important now felt like burdens he was happy to release. The truth he had uncovered was that love, in its purest form, wasn't supposed to drain you. It was meant to uplift and enrich, but that had never been his experience. What he had been searching for all along was the peace he now found in his own company. With Max by his side, he no longer felt lonely. He felt complete. He realized that solitude wasn't something to avoid. It was something to embrace. For years, he had been afraid of being alone, thinking it meant he wasn't worthy or loved. But now, in this quiet chapter of his life, he understood that being alone was not the same as being lonely. He was at peace, and for the first time, he truly valued the independence that came with it. John didn't need to chase love anymore. He had found something far more valuable, self-respect and contentment in his own skin.